So today's workshop, how to tell the difference between a niggle and an injury. So something which is really, really useful because as we all know, as runners, niggles do come up, and it's great to sort of be able to know what to do if it happens, or how to maybe tell if it's serious, something you should be worried about, or something you can just be running through. So hence why we thought we'd run you through this today, because it is something that we get a lot of questions about.
And the answer is, it's always a blurred line. And similar to heart rate zones, the researchers can't even really define, like they can't agree on a singular definition for what is an injury, what is a niggle, all these sorts of things. So when you're looking at the research, they will define a running injury completely differently depending on the study. Some will say, a lot of them will say it's only an injury if you've not been able to run for over 2 weeks. Whereas a lot of other people will say if it occurred whilst you're running, then it's a running injury. So there's all these different definitions. However, generally a running injury is one that will stop you running for longer than 2 weeks, versus a niggle, which is a painful or even just an uncomfortable sensation that tends to last more than 48 hours. So I would define even tightness as a niggle. It's really, really useful information to still be aware of, that, oh, this is getting tight, even though it's not sore, this is really, really tight. I need to go do a bit more mobility work through here. I like to tell my clients, pain is the last guy to the dysfunction party and the first guy to leave. He's a pretty shitty friend, right? He doesn't hang around for long. So long before there's pain, there's tightness. So if you can be acutely aware of your tightness, that's a better guide a lot of the time than pain. And it will very often tell you when things are coming up much earlier than waiting for it to become painful.
Yeah, which is why we put a lot of focus as well on trying to get you guys, I guess, to sort of know and understand your bodies so that you can recognize if things are feeling tight or just different to normal. So you can become aware of these and start to manage them early on when it's very, very manageable and might just set you back a day or two, rather than progresses to an injury, which obviously requires potentially time off.
So a little bit of pain science, and pain is a really interesting topic that we know nothing about, but we're learning a lot about. So pain doesn't exist in your muscles, it exists in your nervous system and it's in your brain. So it's what we call it an output, not an input. It's basically your brain's getting all this feedback from your muscles and from the rest of your body, and then interprets that feedback based on your emotional state, how much sleep you've had, what the hormones in your brain and your body are doing, and all this other information, and then determines how severe that pain will be, or if it's not going to be painful at all. So a classic example of this is if you have adrenaline in your body, you don't feel much pain, right? It's because you're busy running away from a dinosaur. So versus a paper cut, which can be really, really excruciatingly painful, even though it's not life-threatening. So don't equate pain with damage. Pain doesn't equal damage at all. And particularly in cases of, like we know with low back pain and a lot of running injuries as well, things that are really painful don't necessarily equate to long-term damage at all. So, which is why, there's that thing, a lot of practitioners will say running's bad for your knees, which is a load of bullshit. When you look at the research, runners have less arthritis in their knees and hips than non-runners. But it is true, runners do get a lot of knee injuries and a lot of knee pain. Hopefully by now you've figured out why, because people are stuck in the gray zone and they're not varying their training, they're not listening to their bodies, they're not running with good technique, all the things we're trying to teach you. However, that most of the knee pain that runners get is soft tissue pain, so like ITB pain, IT band related or kneecap related, and not actually bony or joint. Sometimes it is, but less commonly. So think of pain not as damage, but as your body's warning lights coming on. It's like flashing orange. It's signaling to you that something's up, and it's telling you to pay attention to it.
I guess, would you say that's the most important thing, Mike? Just to, if you are in pain, sort of use your common sense and really think about why or what you've done maybe differently, or
yes,
and just monitor how it progresses, basically.
That would be the most common thing, yes. To lean into it, realize it's an opportunity. It's your body telling you something is up, and that it's an opportunity to become a better runner. But don't freak out about it, because very often it's not like life-threatening. And the stress around that is actually what causes just as much issues as the actual injury. It's like the stress of coronavirus is going to kill more people than coronavirus.
Yeah, and I think a lot of runners are so guilty about that because a lot of us rely on, I mean, it feels great, and we rely on that sense of really exerting yourself physically, and running's, if it's the main way that we do that, if you do feel a niggle, quite often runners tend to freak out because it's like, oh God, I might have to take some time off running. Which exactly as Mike just said, it almost is self-propagating in the sense that now you've put more stress into your body and your outlook, and you're not going to recover as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and now you're stressed, and now you need to go for a run to clear your head, which might not be what your body needs, and actually just makes it worse. And then it's just this self-perpetuating cycle. I remember when I was injured, one of my practitioners was like, so what are you going to do to expel energy now? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, well, you need to figure something out. So I think every runner needs to realize or have these other tools that they can use, and realize that running, like any movement practice, isn't complete in and by itself. So you've got these other things you can use as coping mechanisms when you get injured, and that sort of thing. Which brings us to training, which essentially is that the whole idea with training is we're making you more anti-fragile. There's this concept of anti-fragility, and basically making you more resilient to stress, and the ability to tolerate load, whether that is the duration of a session or the ability to work without oxygen to create energy, or the ability to work in a harder heart rate zone for longer, or the ability to run further. We're essentially making you more and more anti-fragile. So we're making you more and more resilient to those loads. However, that's a blurry line. It's an art form. It's not purely a science because we're all different. And it's a very blurry line between what is eustress or positive stress that is going to have good training changes, and what becomes distress or like injury, which is an overload. And sometimes it can be a little bit of both. It's never fully black or white. So understanding that we want you working close to threshold, but not, and sometimes you will work over threshold, that's fine short term, but we don't want you over threshold all the time for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, because it means you're overloading, and it means that's when you get injured. So understanding where you're working is really, really important there.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also just say that can change week on week as well. So if you've just got a lot on one week, you're going to be high, you're going to be closer to that threshold exercise aside. So just taking that into account, that every week is not created equal, and just to really pay attention to how your body's feeling and how it's recovering.
Yes. And appreciating, that training does cause muscle damage. It actually causes like micro tears in the muscles, so the body can then repair itself and make it stronger. So it's a stress, right? And stress is neither good nor bad. It's just stress. It's just bad when it's like massively over your threshold. And sometimes actually pain is part of the process, and we see this a lot in like tendon rehab. So for example, like Achilles tendon rehab or patella tendon rehab, the issue is there's no inflammation there. And so in order to actually get inflammation to the area, and the inflammation is the healing process, the rehab is actually painful. And people come to me and go, oh, the physio gave me these exercises and made it feel worse. I was like, that was the point. It's supposed to feel worse, because we're trying to get inflammation in there to help strengthen the tissues. And so very often when like we return to running, most of my runners, they're still in pain when we return them to running. And then we manage that load, so we don't push through it, but we're getting them, we're training their bodies to be more and more able to tolerate that mild level pain. It's not like 10 out of 10 pain. It's usually like a low 1 or 2 or 3 out of 10 pain. Generally, I tell people if it's less than 5/10, it's okay. We don't want it more than 5/10. But do appreciate that sometimes a little bit of pain is necessary. It's part of the training process.
Perfect, which leads exactly into rules of experiencing discomfort or pain. It's like we planned it.
It's like we've done this before. You go, Kate. What are your rules?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we've sort of spoken through the first point already in that never ignore it. Pain is teaching you something. So it's that point again. Don't freak out. Pain's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just your body telling you something. So try to work out what it is that it is telling you. So if, as you do something, is the pain constant? Does it go away after a few days? If you keep doing what you're doing, is it worsening, getting more painful? Pay attention is the first thing, because if you're not paying attention to what's making it better, worse, not changing the pain, then it's very hard to sort of ascertain if it's improving or worsening, if you should be seeking help, stopping running, reducing your load, all those sorts of things. So first thing is just to pay attention.
Which a lot of people don't do, right? And that's like the whole medication system is based on numbing you out to pain. So it's based on numbing out all this really useful information that you could use to try and figure out, is it an endurance issue? Do I only get pain at 10 kilometers when I'm really, really fatigued? Or is it something that comes on at the beginning of the run and then I can warm up and I'm fine, and it comes on at the end of the run or the day after, which is very often something like shin splints tends to be a bit that way. And sometimes even like stress fractures tend to behave a bit that way. So yeah, it sounds obvious, but like a lot of society is based on numbing people's pain out, which isn't very useful.
Absolutely. I think the other side of that is that, again, runners sort of want to not think about pain at all costs because they don't even want to think about the potential of being like having a niggle or being injured. So they don't want to think about it. But thinking about it is the best thing you can do in terms of working out what you can do within your limits at that point. And if you do need to back off either in duration of your runs, number of runs you're doing per week, or the intensity of the runs, obviously depending what the niggle is, you might be able to run long and slow, absolutely fine. And maybe it's the high intensity stuff which is causing you pain. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's once you hit, an hour of continuous running, regardless of how slow you're going, that's when the pain starts because of whatever the niggle is. So just working out what you can and can't do is really useful, because there is very, very likely plenty of training that you can still be doing, particularly if it is very early on the onset of a niggle. And also, if it does progress or you just want to see someone about it, you'll be able to give them a lot more information, which will help any practitioner more accurately sort of help work out what might be going on, and to ultimately help you progress back to running pain-free.
Absolutely. There's always something you can do. So like they used to recommend just bed rest. They don't recommend that for anything anymore. Because when you're just lying around in bed, well, unless you have like the flu, but when it comes to musculoskeletal injuries, they never recommend bed rest, because you're actually just going to decondition, which is actually just going to make your rehab journey longer. And motion is lotion. Motion is what gets the blood flow into areas, allows tissues to heal up, and all those sorts of things. So there's always something you can do, even if you're not doing any running, even if it's just wiggling your toes because you've broken your leg. There's always something you can be doing to optimize your recovery. You just need to figure out what it is and speed up that rehab process. Yeah.
So I think this was the last slide. This was just to conclude everything up to, I guess, some practical advice on what to do if you actually feel a niggle. Like, it's all well and good to sort of pay attention to it. You might be going, what the hell do I actually do? So essentially, the first point we want to put in is, if a pain is sort of under a 3-ish out of 10, and again, when we're talking, I guess, pain scales out of 10, everyone's pain tolerance is very different. So I imagine, Mike, you must get this all the time, where someone's 3 is someone else's like 8. And
so, women's pain tolerance is always much higher than men's.
Of course it is. So again, take that with a grain of salt as well. And I guess grade yourself honestly. Like, you have to be honest with yourself for this to work. But if it doesn't last more than a few days and it's sort of below a 3 out of 10, either reduce the intensity of your running just for a few days, or just keep training and pay attention to it. And then if it gets better and the niggle goes away, well, fantastic. You probably don't have anything to worry about. But if it worsens, that's when we really want to start thinking about, okay, cool, what can we do to back off for a few days? Maybe again, was it the intensity that really flared up the niggle? So let's just do everything really slow and easy for a couple of days and wait for the niggle to sort of go away or the pain to lessen, or reduce the duration, reduce the number of days we're running, all those sorts of things. The very key point that I really wanted to emphasize here as well is that I know a lot of runners don't want to miss any days of running because, you know, the training plan says X, Y, Z, and you couldn't possibly veer from that. But you're much, much, much better off just reducing your training load for a few days or a week or 2 weeks, depending how long it takes to get over that niggle, or adjusting accordingly, and really recovering from that in a short amount of time by being sensible about it, than you are to push through the pain, make the pain worsen, and ultimately just progress that niggle to a more severe problem, which down the line might mean you're taking a month off, 6 weeks off, or just an extended period of time. So get on top of it early would be my biggest piece of advice. I don't know if Mike thinks anything on top of that, but yeah, just start managing it early. And more than likely you'll be back to running as per normal in not a long amount of time at all.
Yeah, totally agree. What springs to mind is this concept of like messy action. So don't spend like 2 weeks Googling the hell out of a thing, and then, because there's so much information out there, that you're like, oh, I don't know if I need to be doing this exercise or this exercise or this exercise. Try different things, and just take messy action. And as Kate said, like deload a little bit. Realize that you will get niggles. Like, we know up to 90% of people training for a marathon distance will get injured during their training. This is a pretty shitty stat, really, but just appreciate that everybody's doing it imperfectly. So try different things. You know, what works for some people doesn't necessarily work for other people, and very often even rehab is a little bit of trial and error to see what your body responds to.
Yeah,
and if you're not sure where to begin, let us know. That's what we're here for.
And if you do need to reduce the running load, don't freak out about it. There's so much other forms of exercise and training that you can do to keep your fitness up, to keep your strength up. So it's not as big a deal as people quite often make it out to be. There is heaps and heaps and heaps that you can still be doing, pretty much, obviously, depending what the injury is, but almost always there's something you can be doing. So yeah, if you do need any sort of forms of variation, let us know. And then the other point here, the last point here is, again, it probably sounds really obvious, but it is important that if your pain does progress or it does last for longer than, 2 to 4 weeks, definitely consider seeking medical advice. We can provide as much help and assistance as possible, but obviously if we're not seeing you for a 30-minute, an hour appointment, seeing you physically in the flesh, it can be difficult. So you're much better off seeing someone in person for medical advice.
Yeah, or telehealth. I do think online consults can still be really effective. I know I do that with a lot of my runners.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, get some one-on-one support and advice and get it investigated a bit further, because I have had some clients, they just thought they had a bit of a hip flexor strain and then ran on it for like 3 months. And then like, oh, it's a hip flexor strain, it'll be fine. And then finally got treatment after like 3 months, and I was like, hip flexor strains, they last a while. They can last like 6 to 8 weeks. But I was like, there's something fishy here. And then we got an MRI, and it was actually a stress fracture that they were running on. That they were just, the repetitive impact was making worse. So if it's hanging around for a long time, even if it's not like 10 out of 10 pain, do just investigate it and just follow that rabbit hole and just, figure out what's going on. I think there's one more slide after this.
Aha, yeah. There is.
Cool. My final words of advice Treat pain holistically. If you're stressed or anxious or depressed, your pain will be worse. Sometimes there's no biomechanical reason for people's pain. It's actually like low iron. So, people with low iron can generally have symptoms of like fatigue, but also just general muscle achiness and joint pain. So sometimes it can be chemical. So treat pain holistically, and also consider sometimes it might be a chemical thing. Injuries aren't a problem; they're an opportunity to become better. I think I welcome injuries when I tell my clients, welcome to pain school, like I'm excited for you because you're going to learn so much about your body in this process, and you're going to come out of it a better runner, having learned something about yourself and about how your body works, and about you would have learned how to fine-tune some movements and all those sorts of things. So injuries are always an opportunity to become a better runner and just live in your body a bit better. They aren't a problem.
I think it's important. I was going to say to adopt that exact mindset, because it can be very easy to go into it really negative and really sort of hating the entire situation. But if you switch the mindset to what Mike's talking about, that's when you can really, really start to learn from it and avoid repeating the injury and just coming out knowing more about your body and becoming a stronger, better runner. But you really have to be in that mindset in the first place. Yeah,
because a lot of runners get injured, take time off, then just get back into running straight away, then do the exact same injury again, take time off, get back into running, do the exact same injury. And it's just this repeat. And it's like, well, what have you learned? How can we prevent this from happening? So, use it as an opportunity. And sometimes the lesson is, holy shit, I need some other coping mechanisms that isn't purely running. I need something that I can expend energy in these other ways, or that is also really gives me a lot of value and a lot of satisfaction. Not a problem, definitely opportunity. Sometimes false alarms do occur, and sometimes there's lots of pain in areas where there isn't actually any issues at all. They're in the minority, but a lot of people with chronic pain can attest to that. And sometimes where it hurts isn't where the issue is, although it's a good place to start. But very often, like for example, knee pain can be due to like a hip or a foot issue going on as well. So sometimes we have this saying that the victim screams and the criminal remains silent. And the classic example is knee pain. So the knee is the victim in a dysfunctional hip or a dysfunctional foot. So it can be useful to not just treat the site of pain, but assess your biomechanics and take your entire movement into consideration, because you run with your whole body. And then the last thing I wanted to say is practice developing like a vocabulary around pain. So like people will come in and they will say, oh, it really, really, really hurts in my hip. And then I quiz them a bit further. I'm like, well, does it hurt, or is it just tightness? And there's a difference between pain, and there's a difference between tightness, and there's even different characteristics of pain. So there's like burning pain or aching pain, and tingling pain and sharp pain, constant pain, electric shock pain. There's all these different types of pain, and so it's important to develop the vocabulary around it as well, which helps with your mindset too. So try and ascertain as much about the pain as you can, and appreciate that tightness and pain are different things, both useful information.
And I think that's it. It sort of wraps it all up. If anyone had any questions at all, or again, if you do have any niggles or just concerns, let us know. Here to help. But yeah, hopefully that lets people sort of identify when to sort of back off if you're feeling a niggle, or if you're worried it's a bit more than a niggle, how to progress from there so we can get you back to running and building up your running as quickly as possible, all those sorts of things. And yeah, I think don't freak out is a really good takeaway and message as well. It's an opportunity to learn something.
Don't freak out and seek support.
Yeah.